What if I told you that being born was the single worst thing that ever happened to you? There was a Romanian philosopher who spent 84 years of his life arguing exactly that. His name was Emil Cioran, and he believed that birth itself is a catastrophe, that consciousness is a disease, that the real tragedy isn't death, but the fact that we were ever born in the first place. And here's what's going to mess with your head. This man, who wrote entire books about how unbearable existence is, who said it would be better if nothing existed at all, lived a long, full life in Paris, writing every single day about the impossibility of living. That's the paradox we're diving into today. By the end of this video, you'll understand why thousands of people are suddenly finding this forgotten philosopher more relevant than ever, and why his ideas might explain that 3 a.m. feeling you get when you can't stop thinking about how strange it is that you just exist. Whether you end up agreeing with him or not, I promise you'll never look at your own existence quite the same way again. Emil Cioran was born in 1911 in a tiny Romanian village called Reșinari. His father was an Orthodox priest, which is kind of ironic considering Cioran would spend his entire life rejecting every form of religious comfort. When he was young, he got involved with Romanian nationalism and wrote some things he'd be ashamed of for the rest of his life. But at 27, something shifted. He moved to Paris on a scholarship and decided to do something extreme. He abandoned his native Romanian language and started writing exclusively in French. Now, this wasn't because he loved France. He did it because he wanted to strip away the beauty and lyricism of Romanian and write with cold, surgical precision about despair. He wanted every word to cut, and he felt Romanian was too poetic for the ugly truths he needed to tell. Here's where his life gets interesting. Cioran lived in a tiny attic room in Paris for decades. He refused university positions. He refused awards. He lived on almost nothing, and he suffered from chronic insomnia. We're not talking about the occasional restless night. This was a man who would wander the streets of Paris at 3 or 4 in the morning, not because it was romantic, but because sleep felt like another form of torture. Those night walks became his laboratory for thinking about existence. But here's the wild part. Everyone who met Cioran said he was delightful, funny, warm, charming in conversation. His friend Fernando Savater called him the only happy pessimist he'd ever known. Picture this, a man writing in his room that life is unbearable, consciousness is a curse, and birth is a mistake, then going downstairs to a Parisian cafe and making everyone laugh over coffee. That's the contradiction that defined his entire life. And it wasn't like he became pessimistic in old age. At 23 years old, he wrote a book called On the Heights of Despair that already contained all his major ideas. This was a lifelong worldview, not the bitterness of an old man. In 1973, Cioran published his most famous book, The Trouble with Being Born. Even the title is an accusation. Not the trouble with life or the trouble of living, the trouble with being born, the act itself. Here's his argument, and I need you to follow this logic even if it makes you uncomfortable. Before you were born, you didn't suffer, you didn't worry, you didn't feel pain or anxiety or dread. You were in a perfect state of non-being. Then, through absolutely no choice of your own, you were ripped out of that peace and thrown into existence. You got a body that will decay, a mind that will torture you with questions it can't answer, and you were dropped into a world that's completely indifferent to whether you suffer or not. You never asked for any of this. You never consented. Your parents decided they wanted a child, but no potential child ever gets to say, "Actually, I'd prefer not to exist, thanks." But Cioran goes deeper than just life is hard. His specific argument is that consciousness is the problem. A tree exists but doesn't know it exists. A dog suffers when it's hungry, but it doesn't lie awake at night contemplating the meaninglessness of its suffering. It doesn't think about death. It doesn't question why anything exists at all. But you're cursed with self-awareness. You don't just exist, you know you exist, and that knowledge is what makes everything unbearable. Cioran writes, consciousness is much more than the thorn, it is the dagger in the flesh. Think about it like this. Your dog, when it's playing with a ball, is just playing. Pure presence, no thoughts about whether this is meaningful play, whether it should have played more yesterday, whether there will be a ball tomorrow, just the act itself. Now think about you trying to enjoy a sunset. You can't just watch it, you're thinking about how it's ending, about how you should have watched more sunsets, about one day you'll watch your last sunset and not even know it. You're thinking about taking a photo for Instagram. You're comparing it to other sunsets. The actual experience is buried under layers of consciousness. That's what Cioran means. Consciousness creates this distance between you and life itself. You're always watching yourself live instead of just living. There's a part of your brain called the prefrontal cortex. It's what separates us from animals. It's responsible for planning, self-reflection, and abstract thinking. And according to modern neuroscience, it's basically an anxiety generator. A 2010 study from Harvard by researchers Killingsworth and Gilbert found something fascinating. People spend 47% of their waking hours thinking about something else than what they're actually doing. Half your life, your mind is wandering. And here's the key finding. This mind wandering consistently makes people unhappy. The more you engage in what scientists call self-referential thought, which means thinking about yourself, the more you activate something called the default mode network in your brain. And this network is directly linked to depression and anxiety. So Cioran, without any brain scans or scientific studies, identified the exact mechanism that neuroscience would later confirm. The human brain's ability to reflect on itself is the source of suffering.
Animals live in what philosophers call the eternal present. They don't carry the past or worry about the future. But you're dragging around every regret and every anxiety simultaneously. Your consciousness is a time machine and it's torturing you with it. Cioran had this concept he called the fall into time, and it's one of his most devastating ideas. He argued that consciousness isn't just awareness, it's specifically temporal awareness. You exist across time, which means you're simultaneously living in 3 different hells. The past is a museum of regrets, everything you did wrong, every opportunity you missed, every version of yourself you failed to become. You replay these scenes endlessly, even though you can't change a single frame. The future is a theater of anxiety, everything that could go wrong, everything you need to worry about, the decay and death that's coming for you. You're constantly living in disasters that haven't happened yet and might never happen. And the present? The present is just the knife-edge moment where you're losing both, where yesterday becomes unchangeable and tomorrow becomes uncontrollable. You can't even be here now without your mind dragging you into was and will be. Your dog doesn't have this problem. When your dog is eating, it's just eating, not thinking, I ate too much yesterday, or what if there's no food tomorrow, just the pure experience of eating. But you can't have a pure experience of anything because consciousness has infected every moment with time. You're never just here, you're always somewhere else in your head. Cioran writes, "We are all geniuses when we dream, the butcher's equal of the poet." What does he mean? In that brief moment before dreams start, in deep sleep, you escape time completely. You're not anyone with a past or future or identity. You're just nothing. And according to Cioran, it's the only peace you ever get. There's actually a psychological theory called terror management theory, developed by Ernest Becker in his book The Denial of Death, that explores this exact idea. Becker argued that human civilization, culture, religion, and achievement are all elaborate defense mechanisms against the knowledge of our own mortality. Animals don't build pyramids or write symphonies because they don't know they're going to die. But you do, and that knowledge poisons everything. Every moment of joy is contaminated with the awareness that it will end. Every relationship carries the shadow of loss. Every achievement is just a distraction from the fact that you're running out of time. Now we get to the most controversial part. Cioran was an anti-natalist, which means he believed having children is morally wrong, not just a bad idea, morally wrong. Here's the logic, and I want you to follow it even if you hate it. When you have a child, you're making a decision on behalf of someone who cannot consent. You're creating a conscious being who will inevitably suffer, who will inevitably die, and who never asked for any of it. Every parent says, I want to have a child, but no potential child ever says, I want to be born. It's a one-sided decision with lifetime consequences for someone else. Now, the South African philosopher David Benatar formalized this into what's called the asymmetry argument in his 2006 book, Better Never to Have Been. Here's how it works. The absence of pain is good, even if there's no one there to enjoy that absence. But the absence of pleasure is only bad if there's someone who exists to be deprived of it. Translation: a person who is never born cannot miss the good things in life because they don't exist to miss anything, but they're spared all the suffering. Therefore, mathematically, non-existence is always preferable to existence. Cioran goes even further than Benatar. He writes, "It is not worth the bother of killing yourself, since you always kill yourself too late." Think about what he's saying. By the time you're capable of choosing not to exist, you've already been forced into existence and already suffered. The damage is done. He continues, "We dread the future only when we are not sure we can kill ourselves when we want to." The idea of suicide, the possibility of exit, is what makes existence barely tolerable. It's like being trapped in a burning building but knowing there's a door marked exit. The comfort comes from knowing you could leave, not from actually leaving. Cioran lived this belief. He never had children. He saw procreation as perpetuating the catastrophe. Every birth is another person sentenced to consciousness, another person who will have to endure the burden of being. And here's what makes this relevant right now. Birth rates in developed countries are collapsing. In South Korea, the fertility rate hit 0.72 in 2023. That means the average woman has less than one child in her lifetime. The population will literally collapse within decades. When researchers ask young people why they're not having kids, you hear Cioran's arguments over and over again. Why would I bring someone into this world? The climate crisis makes the future look terrible. I didn't consent to being born. Why would I force that on someone else? A 2021 study published in The Lancet Planetary Health surveyed 10,000 young people across 10 countries and found that 45% said that climate anxiety affects their daily functioning. 39% said they're hesitant to have kids because of climate change. That's not mental illness. That's people taking Cioran's arguments seriously. Is it ethical to create new conscious beings when you know they'll inherit a degrading world? Here's where Cioran's philosophy becomes truly vertiginous. If life is so unbearable, why not just end it? And Cioran was obsessed with this question. Suicide appears on nearly every page of his work. He has this incredible line: "Without the idea of suicide, I would have killed myself long ago." Read that again. The idea of suicide, the possibility of exit, is what kept him alive. It's like knowing there's a door marked exit in the burning building gives you just enough comfort to stay in the building. The moment you actually use it, you lose the comfort it provided. But there's a deeper philosophical problem. Suicide, for Cioran, is still an action within existence. It's still a participation in being. He writes, "The fact that life has no meaning is a reason to live, moreover, the only one." What does this mean? If you kill yourself because life is meaningless, you're actually giving life meaning. You're saying it's meaningful enough to escape. You're still trapped in the logic of existence. There's also a biological trap. Your consciousness might conclude that non-existence is preferable, but your body doesn't care about your philosophy. Your amygdala, your autonomic nervous system, your survival instincts are all screaming at you to stay alive. Even Cioran, with all his philosophical conviction, couldn't overcome millions of years of evolution telling him to keep breathing. This is different from how Camus approached suicide in The Myth of Sisyphus. Camus said suicide is philosophically invalid because it's an admission that life has defeated you. Cioran says suicide is philosophically valid but practically impossible. The body keeps living despite the mind's conclusion that it shouldn't. There's a psychological term for this: passive suicidal ideation. It means you wish you didn't exist, but you're not actively planning to end your life. You fantasize about non-existence without taking action. Cioran lived in this state for decades. And I need to be clear here. We're talking about this as philosophy, as an intellectual problem. If you're experiencing these feelings in a way that's affecting your ability to function, that's a medical issue, not a philosophical one. Philosophy should expand your thinking, not destroy your capacity to live. Cioran didn't write systematic philosophy. No logical arguments building carefully to conclusions, no treatises or dissertations. He wrote in fragments, aphorisms, short, sharp sentences that hit you like punches. Why? Because systematic philosophy assumes existence has a system, that reality is coherent, that things make sense if you just think about them hard enough. Cioran rejected all of that. If consciousness itself is fragmented, if existence is fundamentally absurd, then his writing should reflect that chaos. Listen to some of his aphorisms. "I'm simply an accident. Why take it all so seriously? It is not worth the bother of killing yourself, since you always kill yourself too late. We inhabit a language, not a country. What do you do from morning to night? I endure myself." These aren't arguments, they're philosophical grenades. They explode in your mind and leave you picking up the pieces. And here's the interesting technical detail. Cioran abandoned Romanian specifically to write in French because he wanted to strip away beauty. Romanian is a lyrical, poetic language. French gave him the cold precision he needed. He said Romanian was too beautiful for the ugly truths he wanted to tell. Compare him to Nietzsche, who also wrote aphoristically. Nietzsche's aphorisms point upward, toward power, toward overcoming, toward saying yes to life despite its suffering. Cioran's aphorisms point downward, toward decay, toward futility, toward the void. Same form, opposite direction. He's part of a French tradition of moralist writers like Pascal and La Rochefoucauld, people who wrote in maxims about human nature. But where Pascal wrote to lead you to God and La Rochefoucauld wrote to expose human vanity, Cioran wrote to make you feel the weight of consciousness itself. If you know anything about pessimistic philosophy, you've heard of Arthur Schopenhauer, and Cioran read Schopenhauer obsessively, but he thought Schopenhauer didn't go far enough. Schopenhauer's big idea was that all existence is suffering because we're all manifestations of a blind, insatiable will. This cosmic force drives everything, and it can never be satisfied. Every desire fulfilled just creates a new desire. You're trapped in an endless cycle of wanting. But Schopenhauer offered exit routes. He said art could give you temporary relief because aesthetic contemplation lets you step outside the will for a moment. And he said asceticism, denying all desires, could lead to a kind of salvation. Cioran said, nice try, but no. Art doesn't save you. It's just another expression of the same cursed consciousness. You're still participating in existence when you make art or appreciate it. And asceticism doesn't work either because even renouncing desire is still an action, still a form of engagement with being. Schopenhauer at least had the will, this big metaphysical principle that explains everything. It's horrible, but it's coherent. There's a reason for the suffering. Cioran doesn't give you even that comfort. There's no cosmic will, no grand principle, no explanation. It's just accident, meaningless, purposeless accident. You exist because some molecules happen to arrange themselves in a particular way. That's it. If Schopenhauer is pessimism with a framework, Cioran is pessimism without even the structure to make sense of it. It's raw, naked confrontation with existence as fundamentally absurd. So here's the elephant in the room we need to address. If Cioran believed all this, if birth is a catastrophe and consciousness is unbearable and existence is meaningless, why did he live to be 84? Why did he spend decades writing thousands of pages about how life isn't worth living? Isn't that the ultimate hypocrisy? Cioran himself was painfully aware of this contradiction. He even writes about it. He says, the only free mind is one that, pure of all intimacy with beings or objects, plies its own vacuity. But he couldn't do it. He kept writing, kept talking to friends, kept taking those walks through Paris, kept drinking coffee at cafes. Here's what I think happened. Writing about suffering became the thing that made suffering bearable. It transformed raw, unbearable existence into something he could examine, control, shape on the page. The act of articulating the impossibility of living became his reason for living. His friend Fernando Sabater said something fascinating. He described Cioran's pessimism as a happiness without causes, without justifications, an infinite inclination to nothing that was also an inclination to everything. Cioran lived in paradox. He had friends, he took pleasure in conversation, he found beauty in Paris, he laughed. The French philosopher Gabriel Lisianu visited him and said Cioran's eyes would sparkle with mischief even while discussing despair. Was this hypocrisy, or is it something deeper? Maybe the theoretical recognition that life has no meaning actually freed him from the pressure to make it meaningful. Maybe accepting the absurdity of existence paradoxically allowed him to exist more lightly. There's a concept in psychology called depressive realism. Some studies, like the one by Alloy and Abramson in 1979, suggest that depressed people actually assess reality more accurately than non-depressed people. Non-depressed people have optimistic biases. They overestimate their control, their abilities, their futures. Maybe Cioran wasn't sick. Maybe he was seeing clearly. And maybe seeing clearly didn't require him to destroy himself. It just required him to stop pretending existence made sense. There's also this ironic end to his story. In his final years, Cioran developed Alzheimer's disease. The consciousness he had railed against for 80 years was finally being erased, and some of his friends said he seemed almost peaceful. The burden of awareness was lifting, the curse was ending. So why are we talking about a Romanian philosopher from the 20th century in 2025? Because everything Cioran wrote about feels more urgent now than it did when he was alive. We live in the age of hyper-consciousness. Social media has created what psychologists call continuous partial attention. You're not just living your life, you're curating it, documenting it, watching yourself live in real time through screens. You're performing consciousness for an audience. Instagram is Cioran's nightmare realized. You can't just experience a moment, you have to photograph it, filter it, caption it, watch the likes come in, compare your experience to everyone else's curated experiences. Consciousness squared. Even our humor has become Cioranan. I wish I were never born isn't shocking anymore, it's a casual Tuesday mood. It's a meme format. We joke about the absurdity of existence because the joke is the only way to acknowledge the truth without being crushed by it. Philosopher Eugene Thacker, in his book In the Dust of This Planet, talks about what he calls cosmic pessimism, the recognition that the universe is not just indifferent to human existence, but fundamentally incompatible with it. We're an anomaly, a glitch, and our consciousness allows us to recognize our own cosmic irrelevance. Thomas Ligotti, the horror writer and philosopher, explicitly draws on Cioran in his book The Conspiracy Against the Human Race. He argues that consciousness is an evolutionary mistake, that nature produced something in humans that it can't contain. And young people are taking these ideas seriously. The anti-natalist movement is growing. Online communities discuss whether it's ethical to have children. Birth rates are plummeting, not just because of economics, but because of a genuine philosophical reckoning with what it means to create new conscious life. The question is, are we engaging with Cioran as serious philosophy, or are we just using his aesthetic to dress up regular depression? We need to talk about the problems with Cioran's philosophy because there are real ones. First, the privilege critique. It's easy to write about the unbearable burden of existence when you're a celebrated writer living in Paris cafes. Someone fleeing war doesn't have time for existential angst. Someone in extreme poverty is dealing with solvable, concrete problems. Cioran's pessimism might be a luxury of people comfortable enough to overthink existence. African philosophy, particularly the Ubuntu tradition, sees existence as fundamentally communal. I am because we are. The isolated, alienated consciousness that Cioran describes might be specific to a particular kind of Western, masculine intellectual experience, not a universal human condition. Second, the logical inconsistency we've mentioned. His life contradicts his philosophy. He never resolved this. If you're building an entire worldview on the unbearability of existence, living to 84 while maintaining friendships and finding small pleasures is problematic. Third, the anti-natalist argument, taken to its logical conclusion, means human extinction. Is that defensible? Even if individual suffering is real, is the collective project of human consciousness, art, science, love, and meaning-making worth nothing? Fourth, we need to acknowledge that Cioran wrote things in his youth aligned with Romanian fascism and anti-Semitism. He later said he was ashamed of those writings, but he never fully confronted them. How much does this color our reading of his pessimism? Is his pessimism partly guilt, partly a way of escaping responsibility for those early positions? And finally, does Cioran's work romanticize suffering in a way that's harmful? Does it give intellectual cover to depression that should be treated medically rather than celebrated philosophically? These aren't questions that invalidate his insights, but they need to be part of the conversation. Okay, you've spent all this time in one of philosophy's darkest corners. What do you actually do with this? First, there's genuine value in confronting uncomfortable truths. We live in a culture of toxic positivity. You're supposed to be grateful, optimized, purpose-driven, manifesting your dreams. Cioran gives you permission to say, actually, existence is hard. Consciousness is often painful, and I'm not crazy for noticing this. That's not depression, that's honesty. There's a concept in psychology called defensive pessimism, where imagining worst-case scenarios actually reduces anxiety because you feel prepared. Maybe Cioran's philosophy works like that. By fully accepting the worst, you stop fearing it. Second, Cioran shows you can acknowledge meaninglessness without collapsing. He lived this paradox for 84 years. Maybe the point isn't to resolve the paradox, but to live in it consciously. Third, his work is a counterweight to hustle culture, to the idea that you need to justify your existence through productivity. If existence is already absurd, the pressure's off. You can just exist without constantly proving you deserve to be. But here's the critical distinction. There's a difference between intellectual engagement with pessimism and clinical depression. Philosophy should expand your thinking, not destroy your capacity to function. If this material makes you feel hopeless in a way that's affecting your life, your relationships, your ability to do basic things, that's different. That's when you talk to a professional, not just a philosopher. Viktor Frankl, who survived Nazi concentration camps, talked about something he called tragic optimism, finding meaning not despite suffering, but through it. That's different from Cioran, but maybe it's a middle path. Acknowledge that existence is hard, that consciousness creates suffering, but find ways to live anyway. So what do we make of Emil Cioran, this man who spent 84 years arguing that being born was a mistake? Here's what I think. Cioran matters not because he's right about everything, but because he's honest about what most philosophy tries to paper over. He looked at consciousness and saw what we all feel at 3 a.m. when we can't sleep, the strangeness of existing, the weight of self-awareness, the absurdity of being thrown into a world we never asked to join. Most philosophy tries to solve this problem, tries to give you meaning, purpose, or at least a framework. Cioran just stares at it, and there's something almost ethical in that refusal to offer false comfort. He argued that birth is a catastrophe, that consciousness is a curse, that non-existence would have been preferable. And then he lived nearly a century, wrote dozens of books, had meaningful friendships, and found something resembling contentment in Parisian cafes. What does that contradiction tell us? Maybe that philosophy and life don't have to match perfectly. Maybe that the impossibility of living is exactly what makes living possible. Because if we truly believed our own pessimism, we'd be paralyzed. Or maybe Cioran discovered that the only way to bear consciousness is to write about its unbearability, that the only way to survive the burden of being born is to turn that burden into words, into something you can hold at a distance and examine. He had that first thought, this is a mistake, and then spent a lifetime turning that mistake into something approaching not meaning, but style, elegance, a way of being that acknowledges the horror without being destroyed by it. And maybe that's all any of us can do. Acknowledge that consciousness is strange and heavy, that we never asked for this, that there's no cosmic purpose making it all okay. And then find small things. Coffee, conversation, words on a page, the way light falls on a Paris street at 3 a.m. Not because those things make existence justified, but because they make it bearable. If you made it this far, check out my video on Schopenhauer's philosophy of suffering or the one on whether having children is ethical.